of the enemies. Last of all is set the name of Melkor, he who rises in might. But that name he has forfeited, and the Noldor, who among the elves suffered most from his malice, will not utter it, and they name him Morgoth, the dark enemy of the world. Great might was given to him by Ilúvatar, and he was coeval with Manwë. In the powers and knowledge of all the other Valar he had part, but he turned them to evil purposes, and squandered his strength in violence and tyranny. For he coveted Arda and all that was in it, desiring the kingship of Manwë and dominion over the realms of his peers. From splendor he fell through arrogance to contempt for all things save himself, a spirit wasteful and pitiless. Understanding, he turned to subtlety, and perverting to his own will all that he would use, until he became a liar without shame. He began with the desire of light, but when he could not possess it for himself alone, he descended through fire and wrath into a great burning, down into darkness. And darkness he used most in his evil works upon Arda, and filled it with fear for all living things. Welcome. I'm Professor Rachel Fulton Brown, and this is The Forge of Tolkien. What is evil? So last episode, I introduced you to Dorothy Sayers' argument about the Trinity, particularly in her understanding of the Trinity as I introduced you to her argument about the Trinity as a metaphor. I try to get too complicated and it all stumbles out, right? Dorothy Sayers understands our description of God as Trinity as fundamentally a metaphor for the workings of the creative mind, right? So that we talk about idea, energy, and power, and when we talk about God as creator, we're talking about this kind of process, right? Which she argues is appropriate for thinking about problems of theology, because it is in fact a metaphor grounded in our own experience as makers, for example, authors, right? And we looked at or gestured towards last time the story of creation. I have my Bible to hand this time. Moving my scripts around in my real life space, right? I forgot the book last time. This time I have it. We talked about, and I'm wondering right now, should I start over? No, I'm going to keep going. I'm stumbling right now, and I think that's appropriate to the theme of the day. I'm also conscious of the fact that I went on for an hour and 40 minutes last time, and I'm trying to be swift, and I'm not being swift. We're just going to settle in and do this, right? Okay, creation. So we have in Genesis the story of creation, and we have God making the things. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and Sayers talks about how even from that very opening statement, we're talking metaphorically, right? We don't know how to talk about God without talking in metaphors of our own experience, because everything that we say is grounded in, well, I'd say, our experience in our bodily experience, and this is not something Sayers articulates fully, but it is a received understanding of linguistics, right? George Lakoff, whom you may be familiar with in another context as a liberal theoretician, but we'll forgive him that for the moment, because he and Mark Johnson wrote a book called Metaphors We Live By, in which they talk about the way in which all of our language, not just fancy poetical language, but all of our language is in fact grounded in our experience as bodies moving in space, and our understanding of time fits with, is kind of metaphorical too, but our bodies moving into space, so that every time we say anything, for example, I need to put that into words. Words there is a container for idea, right? So we've just put the idea of God into the words that say God created heaven and earth. And therefore, everything we always are saying about God, in Sayers' argument, is going to be metaphorical. And I can't remember whether I read this last time, but I did go on last time, so we'll review, right? That she started with this problem that it opens in Judaism, particularly, or is still a feature of Judaism, saying we can't make images, right? But the problem is, fine, you're not making maybe idols, which is a different kind of thing, but you're always making images, because every time you speak, you are using a verbal image for talking about things. And she says no legislation could prevent the making of verbal pictures. To forbid the making of pictures about God would be to forbid thinking about God at all, for man is so made that he has no way to think except in pictures, right? And she also makes this argument more deeply, saying everything that we're talking about is always going to be put into metaphor, into analogy, right? And that concept is going to become more and more significant as we work through Tolkien stories. But as she's talking about the way we think relationally and analogically, analogy is actually somewhat stronger than relation. It's one image that's referring to another, and both are true, right? That if you have an analogy of something, both of those things need to have existence for the transfer to work, right? And she says, in fact, that's true of all language. The fact is, all language about everything is analogical. We think in a series of metaphors. We can explain nothing in terms of itself, but only in terms of other things. And she said, even mathematics can express itself in terms of itself only so long as it deals with an ideal system of pure numbers. The moment it begins to deal with numbers of things, it is forced back into the language of analogy. In particular, she says, when we speak about something of which we have no direct experience, we must think by analogy or refrain from thought. And that, of course, is the huge problem of talking about God. We only encounter God, I mean, to say it out loud makes it sound like duh, but it is kind of duh. We only encounter God through our own experience. So, and she, she has this wonderful phrase, to complain that man measures God by his own experience is a waste of time. Man measures everything by his own experience. He has no other yardstick. So if we're talking about creation, we're talking about God, we're going to be talking from within our own experience, and she suggests that we use this metaphor, use this understanding to recognize talking about the Trinity as a metaphor of our own artistic process, right? So we have idea, energy, and power, and that gives us the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. That gives us this appreciation of what it means to say things like, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. And the earth was void and empty, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved over the waters. And God said, be light made, and light was made. And God saw the light, that it was good, and he divided the light from the darkness. Well, now we're in our theme for today, right? It's like, so God makes heaven and earth, and then and there's darkness, and he says, be light made, and light was made. And now the light was good, and he divides the light from the darkness. Now, of course, in the creation story, as we have it in Genesis, this is chapter 1, he goes through and makes all the things, and we're going to get to all the things that God makes, but we're still in this. You realize how many episodes are spending talking about this one instant, right? The angels, the creation, it's all this, talk about the Big Bang, right? It's all here in this one moment where everything comes into being because God calls it into being. And ultimately, he will see all the things that he had made, and they were very good. In the evening and the morning, the sixth day. So God creates everything. There's darkness, there's light. He sees that it is good. Does that mean, and again, I'm cribbing off Dorothy Sayers a lot because she's a storyteller herself, which helps. She's also a great theorist of artistic work, of creativity, and she's, as I said before, one of the great theologians of the 20th century for her ability to explain things, particularly in terms that ordinary people want to understand, right? And so you get to that point, it's like God created everything, right? If God made everything, did he make the devil? And you realize again, I've had to like unfold all of these problems for you over the course of several discussions. So we've already kind of dealt with the devil, sort of, Melkor. And we know from, if not from the Bible, because the Bible does not tell us about the creation of the angels, they're just already there. We know from the Ainur that Eru created the devil, or in fact created Melkor, right? That Melkor is one of the holy ones, is one of the Ainur, the offspring of Iluvatar's thought. Iluvatar is, great alongside Manwë, so Manwë and Melkor are brothers, which is now making us, like, if we're going to do this kind of by allegory, but not really, and it's not really by analogy either. It's correspondence between Melkor, obviously, and Lucifer, and therefore Satan, and Manwë is not Christ. I hope you appreciate that. He's more like Saint Michael, right, who battles with Satan. So we have Melkor and Manwë, offspring of Iluvatar's thought. Did God make the devil? Which then leads us to the question, well, if God made everything, did he make evil? Now, another great theologian who has dealt with these kinds of questions was, of course, Augustine. In his great work, The City of God, he deals specifically with this creation of angels and the problem of, well, what's Satan? He's an angel, he's Lucifer, he fell. Do they have, in fact, the same nature? Which then leads us to that question that we're dealing with now. What is evil? Where does it come from? If Melkor, aka Lucifer, is a creature of Iluvatar, aka the God who created heaven and earth, does that mean God created evil? Well, Augustine in Book 12 of The City of God deals directly with the creation of the angels and says, outright, in his understanding, that the beginning of the two cities that he's talking about, the city of God and the city of the world, right? He says, I'm going to discuss the creation of man, for it will be apparent that the two cities took their origin from that creation, as far as they are concerned with beings who are both rational and mortal. But as I showed in my last book, this previous book, the beginning of the two cities had already been seen in the angels. And so I see that I may say something about them first. And he has other issues that he wants to deal with for a fellowship between men and angels and such. But the setup here is the major problem that he's dealing with in the city of God, the heavenly city, right? And it's like, okay, you realize how quick we're down into this problem of, well, is it dualism? Is it binaries? What is it? God created heaven and earth. So the city of God, is that just a heavenly city? Does it exist on earth at all? And Augustine, I nearly said Tolkien. Augustine is wrestling with this, right? Because he's saying, well, what's the church, right? If the church belongs on earth, does the city of God have any place on earth, or is it only somewhere else? Is it only on heaven? And that intermingling is complicated for Christians and complicated. It's like, can we behave as fully citizens of the heavenly city, or the city of God, the city of God, while we are in this life, which then gives you that problem of, what's good and evil. And Augustine, setting that up at the beginning, says the beginning of the two cities, of this distinction between the city of God and the city of time, I think is more, I never know what the actual direct contrast is to say, because it's not really just of the earth, because obviously we got these angels problems, and it's not really just of the world, because that's kind of the earth. I think maybe the city in time, but that the city that is not ruled out, that is not the city of God, right? The opposite. And that also fits with what's the not city of God? Our question today. So that the beginning of the two cities is already there with the angels. So he says, so there's not four cities, right? Two of the angels and two of men. There's only the city of God, and the city of not God. And the angels participate in both of those, just as human beings do. So he says, we may speak of two cities or communities, one consisting of the good, angels as well as men, and the other of the evil, right? So the cities are the city of the good and the city of the evil. And we got angels and men in both of them. Where do they come? Where does the bad stuff come from? Where does the evil come from? Well, it doesn't come from their nature as such, right? That these angels, the bad angels, the evil angels, are not created bad angels, right? The contrasted aims of the good and evil angels did not arise from any difference in nature or origin. It would be utterly wrong to have any doubt about that, since God created both. And he is good in his creation and fashioning of all substances. Oh dear. All right, so what do? That God made both the angels that are the good angels and the bad angels. So basically, yes, God made Satan, because God made Satan as Lucifer, just as Iluvatar in his thinking, giving birth in his thought, gives birth to Melkor just as much as he does to Manwe. So God made evil? We need to go back and read more in the Ainur. Now, like I said, it's been several episodes, and I appreciate we've been stuck at this moment of beginning. I talked about that last time, right? That the idea, energy, power imagery, you have this idea, right? Bango, it's there in your mind. And I knew 4 episodes ago that I needed to talk through all of these problems with you, and we're still in it 4 episodes in. We'll see how long it takes. This is the problem of time, right? It's like, in order to give you understanding of what happened in that instant, we have to labor in time, put my energy into talking to you. You have to listen to me for this to work back on you. This is the problem that the Ainur is also describing, right? When is creation? How many layers does it take of entry into being for there to be the world, for there to be existence? And at what point in that coming into being does evil exist, right? If, in fact, as we are saying right now, God created the good and bad angels with the same nature, their origin is the same, God created them all good, where does evil come from? Well, 2 episodes ago we talked about discord, and I gave you a lot of discordant maybe thoughts about Behemoth and Leviathan and things like that. I also wanted all of those images in your mind for what Melkor could be, right? The problem of Job and the testing and so forth. Now we need to go back to the moment of creation. I think we have all the elements now that I needed to explain this for you this time. Pace us through, right? When does evil come into existence? Well, we have Iluvatar's thinking and listening to the music, and Melkor brings in his discord, and then Iluvatar rises up and proposes new themes, and we get those. This is also the overlapping of the creation of the elves and the men, right? We're not there yet, but still where the evil comes from. And I talked previously also about the way in which the music's, Iluvatar's themes and the music's interweave, so that Melkor's theme becomes incorporated into the themes of the elves and the men, the first children, the children of Iluvatar, so that the beauty comes from the blended sorrow. And thus far, the Ainur are simply hearing the music, right? So there's the harmonies and the choirs and everything are heard. And then Iluvatar says, I will show you what you've sung, right? Which is very interesting. And he says, And thou, Melkor, shall see, right? So now we're being given not just the music, the hearing of the themes, and that apropos of Sayers saying that mathematics has this metaphorical analogical quality. Music has that same sort of problem. It's like they've been singing, and that patterning, that mathematical measuring and ordering. Again, I know I've talked about all these things, and I'm forgetting which episode which is which now. The music, I think I talked about that in the music one. That this the music, in Tolkien's telling doesn't yet have being properly, but neither will it quite yet now. It's going to be made vision first. It's going to be made a visible pattern, not just a mathematical pattern, right? So we're extending into space and time in certain ways, although I don't think those exist yet. Creation's hard work. This idea stuff is tricky. Okay, so he says, to the Ainur, those things ye have sung, I will show them forth, that you may see what you have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempted this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. Then the Ainur were afraid, and they did not yet comprehend the words that were said to them. And Melkor was filled with shame, of which came secret anger. But Iluvatar rose in splendor, and he went forth from the fair regions he had made for the Ainur, and the Ainur followed him. Now, a lot of interesting things have happened in that little exchange, right? So we're going to show you forth the music, and right now Iluvatar is still insisting that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, including Melkor's, including the discord. That Iluvatar is claiming at this point, and this is the story that we looked at with Job, right? That, and as the Lord declaims to Job at the end of that book, saying, "Where were you when I created all this stuff? It all comes from me. When the morning stars sang together, where were you? I made the sea monster. I made the Leviathan." That's the sea monster. I made the behemoth. I made the Leviathan. So all of it still comes from Iluvatar. That Melkor, whatever he's sung, whatever discord he's put into his music, Iluvatar at this point is insisting that's still from me. And that you, if you try, shall prove but mine instrument. Okay, so that works in the story of Job, right? It's like the degree to which Melkor is singing discordantly, Iluvatar claims is still part of his grand theme, and is nothing that is not his. So there is evil there? But Melkor is filled with shame, of which came secret anger. Now, when they come into the void, Iluvatar said to them, "Behold your music," and this actually fits with Genesis, right? This problem of the earth was void and empty, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved over the waters, and God said, "Be light made," and light was made. So there is the void. They come into the void, and Iluvatar says to them, "Behold your music." And he showed to them a vision, giving to them sight where before was only hearing. And they saw a new world made visible before them, and it was globed amid the void, and it was sustained therein, but was not of it. And as they looked and wondered, this world began to unfold its history, and it seemed to them that it lived and grew. And when the Ainur had gazed for a while and were silent, Iluvatar said again, "Behold your music. This is your minstrelsy, and each of you shall find contained herein, amid the design that I set before you, all those things which it may seem that he himself devised or added. And thou, Melkor, wilt discover all the secret thoughts of thy mind, and wilt perceive that they are but a part of the whole and tributary to its glory." Okay, so he's shown them this. We're going to learn that, in fact, at this point, he's not created anything. There's no being yet. There's just this vision. But at this point, Iluvatar is still insisting that everything that Melkor sang was still from him, Iluvatar. Thou, Melkor, will discover all the secret thoughts of thy mind. These things that you thought, that even that secret shame, even that anger, is that part of Iluvatar's music? And wilt perceive that they are but a part of the whole and tributary to it. That somehow Melkor's anger and secret shame and discord are all still part of the vision. And that Iluvatar claims now this is his willing, his doing, right? And many other things Iluvatar spoke to the Ainur at that time, and because of their memory of his words and the knowledge that each has of the music that he himself made, the Ainur knew much of what was and is to come, and few things that are unseen by them. So that's another issue. That's the foreknowledge that the Ainur have. How far into the story can they see? Because in the story problem, they're going to enter into the story, and then exactly can they foresee what their own role is going to be? And he's sort of saying yes or no. Okay, so they find in looking at this vision that they're giving that even the things. So remember that when the Ainur were singing, Melkor came in and disrupted the music of the other singers. And so, for example, Ulmo, when he was singing, turned his thought most to music. To water, right? I'm jumping around on the text on my eyes, right? Ulmo sings of water, so his music is all water music, right? Manwe sings of air, and I talked about that last time. We were talking about the breath, right? The breath of the Valar. So Manwe is Ainur, one of the Ainu, sings of air and breath and winds, and Aule sings of earth, right? The fabric of earth had Aule thought, to whom Iluvatar had given skill and knowledge, and scarce less to Melkor. But the delight and pride of Aule is in the deed of making and in the thing made. And he's different from Melkor. We'll get to that in a second. The other Ainur have sung parts of what is going to be the earth, right? The vision that is being shown to them. And at this point, again, we're still with the vision, and we're still with Iluvatar insisting that nothing that Melkor has done disrupts the glory of Iluvatar's proposition, right, of his theme. And Iluvatar spoke to Ulmo and said, here's a good example of the way in which, even when Melkor thinks that he's disrupting the theme, is participating in it. So Iluvatar spoke to Ulmo and said, seest thou not here in this little realm of the deeps of time, Melkor hath made war upon thy province? He hath bethought him of bitter cold, immoderate, and yet had not destroyed the beauty of thy fountains, nor of thy clear pools. Behold the snow, and the cunning work of frost. Melkor hath devised heats and fire without restraint, and hath not dried up thy desire, nor utterly quelled the music of the sea. Behold, rather, the height and glory of the clouds, and the ever-changing mists, and listen to the fall of rain upon the earth. And in these clouds thou art drawn nearer to Manwe, thy friend, whom thou lovest. Then Ulmo answered, truly, water is become now fairer than my heart imagined. Neither had my secret thought conceived the snowflake, nor in all my music was contained the falling of the rain. I will seek Manwe, that he and I may make melodies forever in thy delight. And Manwe and Ulmo have from the beginning been allied, and in all things have served most faithfully the purpose of Iluvatar. Okay, see, still, we don't know, do we have evil yet? Have we found evil, right? Melkor sung in discord, Ulmo sang about music, water. Ulmo sang about water, Melkor tried to disrupt it, Iluvatar takes all the disruption that Melkor tried to introduce into Olmo's song and turns it into something even more beautiful, right? We have water music that becomes snow music and frost music and rains and mists and clouds, right? Think of all the weather, everything that Olmo has sung, and then we have the winds and the rains, right? Manwë and Olmo work together, and yet Melkor's discord. It's like, how many of you love a great thunderstorm, right? That is that not part of the great glory of the water and the air? Think about what would happen if we had no thunderstorms, right? They're very destructive. They can be quite terrifying. Your dog always needs some kind of comfort from the thunder. But Melkor does not, in that, therefore, introduce evil, does he? So evil is something other, is it? Could it be, than just discord, because the disruptions become part of the great music. It's like without, and it's not even clear that it's conflict yet, right? It's just discord. Without the notes that are discordant, you don't hear the harmony as clearly. That contrast, the contrasts are part of the glory of the music. Well, we're seeing this vision in the void, and then it stops. But even as Olmo spoke, and while the Ainur were yet gazing upon this vision, it was taken away and hidden from their sight. And it seemed to them that in that moment they perceived a new thing, darkness, which they had not known before except in thought. But they had become enamored of the beauty of the vision, engrossed in the unfolding of the world which came there into being, and their minds were filled with it. For the history was incomplete, and the circles of time not full wrought when the vision was taken away. Then there was unrest among the Ainur, but Iluvatar called to them. So now we have darkness, right? And you remember in the problem of creation, we have the earth was void and empty, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved over the waters. And God said, "Be light made," and light was made. The void has always been there, or has it? And that's, remember, Melkor at a certain point in the original proposition, the music was considered that Iluvatar did not give enough thought to the void, and that was his first movement into discord. But now we've had the vision of Arda, the pattern, and Iluvatar has woven that discord into the beauty of the pattern. And now that the vision is gone, suddenly they have darkness, right? I do think it's interesting how, again, just as Tolkien is filling in all of the backstory on the creation of the angels, it's as if he's filling in the backstory on these four verses in Genesis, right? It's like, if God created heaven and earth, and you have the void, and then you have darkness, and which comes first? Why does darkness exist when there's no light? Which is it? How is it? Well, here we have Tolkien unfolding all of that and saying, okay, so God, Iluvatar, showed the angels the pattern. And there is a kind of we in Genesis to let us make, right? But he's opened up to them the pattern, and they love it, and they want to continue to see it. And now they're it's like unrest. Is that evil? And because the vision has come and now is ceased, they have this knowledge of darkness. Is darkness evil? It's hard, perhaps not yet. But Iluvatar called to them and said, "I know the desires of your minds, that what ye have seen should verily be, not only in your thought, but even as ye yourselves are, and yet another. Therefore I say, Ea, let these things be. And I will send forth into the void the flame imperishable, and it shall be at the heart of the world, and the world shall be. And those of you that will may go down into it. And suddenly the Ainur saw afar off a light, as it were, a cloud with a living heart of flame. And they knew that this was no vision only, but that Iluvatar had made a new thing. The world that is. Okay, now last episode I talked about the Ainur enter into this Arda, the world that is, and become the Valar, the powers of the world. And so when they enter into it, they take on not only the love of water and air and earth and growing things and the underworld and things like that. They take on the characteristics that they do because of their characteristics as angels, right? But we have now the fiat, right? Be light made, fiat lux, but Tolkien renders it, and I think this is one of his moments of vast and lovely genius. This pure vowels, right? I'm talking in my poetry class, we've done a lot of discussion of consonants and vowels, and consonants are stops, right? When you have something that's a consonant linguistically, it's right, all of those stops in some ways. Vowels are the things that extend, right? When you're singing, those are the sound that you can continue indefinitely. You can just, this consonant is can you continue that? But ayahs are they're open, and the vowels are very open. And here it's like Iluvatar has, in this great speaking, if you want to know what the word was, right? The word that God spoke, fiat, it's a little crisp, right? The let it be, the coming into creation of and now the world is, and the Ainur fall in love with it and want to enter into it, right? Again, have we at this point yet discovered evil? Everything so far has still been this problem of it's necessary to the beauty of what Iluvatar is designing, and nothing thus far seems in fact to be evil. Even Melkor's secret shame, and Iluvatar pushes against him, right? That Melkor, you will see here in this pattern all the secret thoughts of thy mind, even that secret shame and anger. Okay, well, what happens with the Ainur enter into the world, and they become the powers, and they be earth, air, and fire. The fire is there at the heart, and is there an Ainur that's fire? Well, Melkor. That they enter into it are the elementals, right? And they are the powers of the world. And when they, again, when I talked about this last time, when they enter into it, they find that everything's still to be made, and so they have to work in crafting. Well, if Olmo is making the water things, and Manwë is making the air things, and Aule is working with the earth and so forth, what is Melkor up to? Then Melkor saw what was done, and that the Valar walked on earth as powers visible, clad in the raiment of the world, and were lovely and glorious to see and blissful, and that the earth was becoming as a garden for their delight, for its turmoils were subdued. His envy grew then the greater within him, and he also took visible form. But because of his mood and the malice that burned in him, that form was dark and terrible. And he descended upon Arda in power and majesty greater than any other of the Valar, as a mountain that wades in the sea and has its head above the clouds, and is clad in ice and crowned with smoke and fire. He's a volcano. And the light of the eyes of Melkor was like a flame that withers with heat and pierces with a deadly cold. Thus began the first battle of the Valar with Melkor for the dominion of Arda, and of those tumults the elves know but little. So they don't know yet there. Yet it is told among the Eldar that the Valar endeavored ever, in despite of Melkor, to rule the earth and to prepare for the coming of the firstborn. That's the elves. And they built lands, and Melkor destroyed them. Valleys they delved, and Melkor raised them up. Mountains they carved, and Melkor threw them down. Seas they hollowed, and Melkor spilled them. And naught might have peace or come to lasting growth. For as surely as the Valar began a labor, so would Melkor undo it, or corrupt it. And yet their labor was not all in vain, and though nowhere and in no work was their will and purpose wholly fulfilled, and all things were in hue and shape other than the Valar had at first intended, slowly nonetheless the earth was fashioned and made firm. Do we yet have evil? Well, again, Dorothy Sayers is going to help us here to unpack this problem. And we say, if God made everything, did he make the devil? Do we have, in fact, evil yet, if what's going on constantly, even at the level of the discord, just the music, at the level of the vision, at the level of Arda that actually exists, Ea, we have material creation, but it's, Melkor is basically making the earthquakes and volcanoes. Is that evil? Is the darkness evil? What is evil? What have we actually gotten there yet? Well, Sayers sets this up as saying, if we're thinking in terms of Christian theology, the first thing you have to understand is that evil doesn't exist of itself, right? And we say God has created Melkor, God has created Lucifer, Iluvatar has created Melkor, God creates Lucifer, and the angels, like Lucifer or Melkor, are themselves in origin and nature still good. Do you still don't quite, you can't say that God created the evil, right? To say that God created evil is to think in Manichaean terms, and it's interesting that Augustine was so insistent on the creator God creates the angels, and he's good in his creation and fashioning all of substances. You can't claim that God creates them evil, because otherwise you end up basically as a Manichaean, which Tolkien did it again. Augustine had been for 10 years, right? He'd been so convinced that it was impossible to understand the existence of evil without positing its actual creation, that it makes much more sense to explain existence by way of two creators, right? The Manichaean answer is that God didn't create the devil, the good God did not make evil, but is therefore not omnipotent either. That there are two principles in reality, good and evil, and they war with each other, and that God made everything good. God made the good stuff, and the bad God made the evil stuff, and they battle it out together, and that's what we're experiencing. Well, Tolkien's not going to be a Manichaean, because that is not going to have a theology that a mind that believes in the Blessed Trinity could accept. So we're going to have to understand where evil comes from some other way. And what I like in this chapter, this is maker of all things, maker of ill things. Sayers is sort of stepping through from within her metaphor of creation as an artist to, I think, really helpfully unpack why God can both make everything and see that it's good, and evil be something that actually is real and exists, but that God not be responsible for it as creator, or not. It's not responsible. That's not the right word. Okay. All the pieces were there in the Ainur, and we've gotten them now. We have the light, the consciousness of the void, the vision. When the vision leaves, the Ainur suddenly understand darkness, which they hadn't previously, and that we can see by way of Melkor. There's hints, right, and his anger and his secret shame and his malice, right, and his darkness, and his mood, his form is dark and terrible, and he has that malice that we're working up to understanding exactly where the evil is coming from, and it has to do somehow with the participation in the making of Arda, and that therefore it is an artistic problem. You can say, listen, worrying about whether evil exists or not, I mean, if you fashion it in that form, it's like this evil force that we have to be battling. And I will say, as much as I love, for example, Susan Cooper's Dark is Rising series, she gives evil a real existence, which is a problem, right? That the dark constantly rises and the light has to fight against it, and the dark constantly rises and the light it's like that's giving evil this existence, this force that the light has to always battle against. That's Manichaean rather than orthodox. It's premising that darkness exists of itself and is trying to snuff out the light, rather than, as a proper understanding is, there's the before and after is tricky here, right? And exactly what that means. So okay. Ea, there's Arda. So being, there's something that is, right? That is and exists now. Once you have that thing that exists, you have not exist, right? And this is what Sayers is trying to argue, that we have a being creates not being. She says, not merely contemporaneously in the world of space, but also in the whole extent of time behind it. So that in the absence of being, it would be meaningless to say not being precedes being, yet in the presence of being, that proposition becomes both significant and true because being has made it so. Or to use the most familiar of all metaphors, before light, there was neither light nor darkness. Darkness is not darkness until light has made the concept of darkness possible. Darkness cannot say, I precede the coming light, but there is a sense in which light can say, darkness preceded me. And okay, and that's tricky, right? Is because then that's what happens in Genesis when we have. Isn't it good that I have to page through these books so you have time to think about what I'm just saying? Okay, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, and the earth was void and empty, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved over the waters. And God said, be light made, and light was made. And God saw the light, that it was good, and he divided the light from the darkness. It doesn't make sense as the Ainur see it, right? They first see the pattern and the vision, and then they understand darkness. Before they were shown the vision, they don't have any understanding of darkness. But after the vision is there and then ceases, they do, right? So before God makes light, there's no darkness. But in fact, it does make sense to say, for the light to say darkness precedes. How can that be? Well, again, the metaphor is helpful here. For example, an author writes something, say Shakespeare, say he writes Hamlet, and obviously Sayers plays off of the to be or not to be quite fun, wittily here, but so Shakespeare writes Hamlet, she says. That act of creation enriches the world with a new category of being, namely Hamlet, the play, right? So you think God creates everything, and your mind, it's hard to get your mind around that idea because what was there before there was everything that God created? There's Arda, right? The world that is. Think of it in the metaphor that we have of the artist and the author. Shakespeare writes the play. Well, so now there's this new category of being Hamlet, the play. But simultaneously, it enriches the world with a new category of not being, namely Not-Hamlet. Everything other than Hamlet, to the furthest bounds of the universe, acquires, in addition to its former characteristics, the characteristic of being not Hamlet. The whole of the past immediately and automatically becomes not Hamlet. I apologize for my pings. I can turn my notifications off. Sorry. There we go. No more pings. Pingless now. We will be not ping. Ping and not ping. The ping came into being, and now suddenly you realize that the entire time prior to that in this video we had not ping. but it only becomes into being in fact when we've had pink. All right, something like that with Hamlet, right? That although because God creates a time with everything else, the not time is also problematic. Once the thing exists, it has everything else that isn't it has that category of being not it. It's still not evil, right? Hamlet, not Hamlet. Not Hamlet is not evil, it's just not Hamlet, right? And darkness is like that. It's just not light, right? So to be able to be thinking in terms of light and darkness as good and evil. No, darkness is just not light. It's not evil. It's not a cancellation of light. It's just the light. You're able to understand that it is not light. So we have dark, light and not light, light and dark. Darkness is not the evil thing. And she's saying what's interesting about this is only X can give reality to not X. That is to say, not being depends for its reality on being. That not characteristic is, again, still not evil. Darkness is not evil in relation to light. It's just not light. But it doesn't exist until there is light. Right? Okay. So she said, do we have all that right now? We're still at the where is evil, and how does it relate to creation, and how does it come into being if in fact everything's created by God? Well, arguing on these lines, we may make an attempt to tackle the definition of evil as the deprivation or the negation of the good. If evil belongs to the category of not being, then two things follow. First, the reality of evil is contingent upon the reality of good. And secondly, the good, by merely occurring, automatically and inevitably creates its corresponding evil. In this sense, therefore, God, creator of all things, creates evil as well as good, because the creation of a category of good necessarily creates a category of not good. From this point of view, those who say that God is beyond good and evil are perfectly right. He transcends both because both are included within his being. But the evil has no reality except in relation to his good, and this is what is meant by saying that evil is negation or deprivation of good. But that's not quite it, right? She's going to go on. If you think about evil simply as not being, what got into my head just then was like Thanos, and then, if you've never existed before, is that actually evil? Having existed is not existing, in fact, evil. The Avengers, Thanos, right? I was thinking about that because apparently that glove that he has it looks a lot like a hand reliquary. One of the saints, Catherine of Siena. Oh no, there I went off. Okay, the not being is, I think it's not quite evil yet. It's like evil is not just the not being. There's something else. And that's where we're starting to get Melkor. Well, he has to have one more step, right? It's like you can't just be disrupting the pattern, which is really not a negation, right? The discord is not a negation of the music. And therefore, Iluvatar continually incorporates it into the music. And even the disruption of the weather, the snow and the ice, the volcanoes, again, those are certain, it's like we say natural disasters aren't really evil, right? They're just part of the patterning. They're not in what does it take for it to be actually evil. I'm trying to figure out which one to tell you first, right? Because again, these things are, the ideas are all there, and I have to use the energy to get them out to have the power, right? It's like you have that understanding, and I'm going to unfold it for you, and I have to get it out for you. There's a very, very significant step that both Augustine and Sayers try to explain, and that Tolkien is going to use his entire legendarium to illustrate. So this is really, really important. Right? You want to know what evil is. Hold on. You're about to have the moment that you see it, that you hadn't seen it before, and I hope you all go, aha, right now I understand, well, Christianity even more fully, but it's like now I understand what it means to sin. All right? So this is the way that Augustine explains it. Okay, so the contrasted aims of the good and evil angels did not arise from any difference in nature or origin. It would be utterly wrong to have any doubt about that, since God created both, and he is good in his creation and fashioning of all substances. We must believe, therefore, that the difference had its origin in their wills and desires. The one sort persisting resolutely in that good which is common to all, which for them is God himself, and in his eternity, truth, and love, while the others were delighted rather with their own power, as though they themselves were their own good. Thus they have fallen away from that supreme good which is common to all, which brings felicity, and they have devoted themselves to their own ends. They have chosen pride in their own elevation in exchange for the true exaltation of eternity, empty cleverness in exchange for certainty of truth, the spirit of faction instead of unity and love, and so they become arrogant, deceitful, and envious. The cause of the bliss of the others is their adherence to God, and so the cause of the misery of the apostates must be taken to be the exact contrary, their failure to adhere to him. Therefore, the correct reply to the question, why are the one sort happy, is because they cling to God, and why are those others wretched? Reply is because they do not cleave to him. All right, that's maybe it's like, I don't know if I like that. I'm just like, you have to believe in God to be happy. It's what do you have in your mind that means, right? What does it mean to say, I cleave to God? I cleave to the creator of heaven and earth, created all things good. What does it take to fall into evil? This is the way Sayers sets it up, right? It's like, so Augustine gives the usual answer, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. You're saying, okay, the bad angels are the ones that don't cling to God. And so not clinging to God is bad, and therefore not clinging to God is evil. And I appreciate that that's probably not yet a satisfying answer because, well, why can't I? Why can't I turn from God? Why can't I go against what God created? Why can't I are you starting to get there? Why can't I do what I want? It's like, okay, so she says, as long as not being remains negative and inactive, it produces no particular effects, harmful or otherwise. It's just darkness. But if Not-Hamlet becomes associated with consciousness and will, we get something which is not merely Not-Hamlet. We get Anti-Hamlet. And it's like, you realize we say, so Christ and Antichrist. You have to understand what Antichrist is. Anti-God, Anti-Hamlet, it's anti-earth, anti-creation. Which ones are there? Someone has become aware of his Not-Hamletness, and this awareness becomes the center of will and activity. The creative will, free and active like God, is able to will not being into being, and thus produce an evil which is no longer negative but positive. This, according to the ancient myth of the fall, is what happened to men. They desired to be as gods, knowing good and evil. Thus, the fall, she talks about, has been described as the fall into self-consciousness, and also as the fall into self-will. And that is what we're starting to see happen with Melkor, right? That he's got this shame and anger and desire. And at first, Iluvatar is saying, well, I'll just, that folds you into the glory, but he's envious. he's envious. He really, all of these, they're movements of the will to assert itself against the design of the creator, right? And so it's like if they have art as the pattern, and the more Melkor pushes against what Iluvatar designs into that creation, the more he starts becoming evil. This is not going to be like the full his full fall, right? I really going to need at least another episode for this. So it's like I said, this is in fact Tolkien's entire theme, and I'll prove that to you in a second. But that we have to get to this understanding of what's the difference between Not-Hamlet and Anti-Hamlet. Well, it's the difference between being. I'm trying to summarize what's in fact a longer argument for her, but it's the difference between being. Yes, that's where she said the author and the not author, and the example she gave here is, say you're a poet and you're trying to write a poem, right? And you want to put everything into your pattern and choose the right words to go into the patterns. Well, then the wrong word can be with simply the word that doesn't fit in the thing that you're crafting, right? And so that wrongness in the poet, as you're trying to write the poem and you're trying to get the right word to go in the place in the poem where it belongs, the wrongness is there like darkness, right? It's like, here's the light word, the right word is the light, and all the wrong words, all the other words that don't fit in your pattern are simply the wrongness, right? They're just the not right. Evil comes when, and this, it's, I think in this sense, it's like the author of the thing can't create evil. I think that's, I just realized that for her that's also part of the problem, is that everything God creates is going to be good, because the author of the poem, here's like, is that a bad poem? Can you have a bad poem? Is the not good the bad? There's an aesthetic question in there. Anyway, the the author of the poem will make the thing, and the thing made is going to be good. And there can be all of the sorts of things that don't belong in the poem that are not therefore evil, they just don't belong in that creation, right? And if you think of, and Tolkien's trying to play this off in his own setup with the experience of the Ainur being able to see the music play out and then want to hear all of the music, and that's the sort of story that they're going to be in. And then there's also the place that they're going to be in the story, which is Arda. So they go into the story, and it exists in both space and time, right? So it has history and narrative, or it has history and geography, right? And that, sorry, I'm thinking too hard, I hope. I forgot what I was saying there. That the Ainur want to be part of that story. They want to be in it. I forgot where I was going with that. The sense being, if you're going with the pattern that Iluvatar has set out, you're part of that story, and that's appropriate. And so Melkor's music can go against it can't go against that propositioning. But if someone comes along, for example, and the example that Sayers gives is David Garrick, who messed up some of Shakespeare's poems, plays, if you remember, that Garrick starts rewriting them and trying to the Balderizing them, right? He rewrites them so that they're not rude and things like that. The not author, it's not the not author, it's the anti-author comes in and doesn't work with the pattern that the author has performed. It's not like you as a actor say the words of Hamlet or something like that, or you as a sub-creator want to rewrite Hamlet and give it form. It's like every theater production has this problem. It's like, can you put on the play that in fact fits with what the author intended for the play. That if you come along and not just have the wrong words that don't belong in the play, but start messing it up, right? She says misquotation, misinterpretation, and deliberate distortion produce the same kind of evil in different ways. We may feel that they are quite dissimilar offenses. Misquotation arises from carelessness or bad memory, misinterpretation from lack of understanding, deliberate distortion from a perverted intention. We may call them mechanical or material defect, intellectual error, moral wickedness. In fact, however, they have this much in common. They all arise from the circumstance that the other person is not God and is trying to be as God. Okay, so pack this back in. That you, for example, are writing a poem, and you're picking the right words, and these other words don't belong, and they're not those other words, those wrong words that don't fit in your particular construction aren't evil. They're just not the right words for this one. But somebody else comes along and tries to act as God on your own creation. I know you all know how this feels. And starts rewriting your poem purposefully and then claiming it's your poem or misrepresenting it and stuff. And that active anti-writing, Sayers is suggesting as the sense of what it means to be acting against God as author, right? And you realize that that's very much what Augustine is trying to tell you about what the angels have done, right? They've chosen pride in their own elevation in exchange for the true exaltation of eternity, empty cleverness in exchange for the certainty of truth, the spirit of faction instead of unity and love. So they become arrogant, deceitful, and envious. The evil angels, the bad angels, the fallen angels are working against God constantly. And it's like God, maybe that's what I was thinking about. God has propounded the story of creation, right? And that we are living in it, and you're finding your appropriate role in it that you've been given as a creature within that story. That's where I was thinking about the Ainur. They enter into it. They've sung the song before the throne of Iluvatar. They enter into the creation, become the powers, and they're partly aware and partly not fully aware of exactly how the music is going to play out. But we are all creatures of God, been put in this story, and to the degree that we cling to the pattern proposed for us in the music, we're happy, right? But to the degree that we go against the pattern that has been proposed for us, which God wills for us to be good, right? We wants this music to be beautiful, and he wants to have, our rejoicing in it. To the degree that we go against it and try to put in our own stuff, become like gods, make the story mine. I'm going to go against God and make this story. He thinks he's so great. I'm going to make my story better. It's like every atheist ever becomes bitter like that, right? It's like you're going to, or the ugliness and the bitterness and the envy and the malice comes from this effort to rewrite the story out of one's own ego. Yes. That is what Melkor is going to end up doing. And it comes out in the creatures that follow with him, so the other fallen angels, right? Yet so great was the power of his uprising that in ages forgotten he continued with Manwë and all the Valar, and through long years in Arda held dominion over most of the lands of the earth. But he was not alone. For the Maiar, many were drawn to his splendor in the days of his greatness, and remained in that allegiance down into his darkness, and others he corrupted afterwards to his service with lies and treacherous gifts. Dreadful among these spirits were the Valarakar. I realized I read this last time, I still couldn't say that. Valarakar. The scourges of fire that Middle-earth were called Balrogs, demons of terror. Among those of his servants that have names, the greatest was that spirit whom the Eldar call Sauron, or Gorthar the Cruel. In his beginning he was of the Mire of Allah, and he remained mighty in the lore of that people. In all the deeds of Melkor, the Morgoth is the enemy, so like Lucifer the Satan, which is Melkor the Morgoth. Upon Arda and his vast works and the deceits of his cunning, Sauron had a part, and was only less evil than his master, in that for long he served another and not himself. But in after years he rose like a shadow of Morgoth and a ghost of his malice, and walked behind him on the same arena's path down into the void. So here Melkor is, he's given all his ranks of angels, and the fallenness we are going to learn has to do with this exercise of will against the pattern. Well, and I promised to show you that Tolkien actually was thinking about all of this, and that this is the core of what he wanted to prove in story fashion with his mythology. And we looked last time at part of the letter that he wrote to Peter Hastings. Here we go. We looked at part of the letter that he wrote to Peter Hastings, thinking about what he says about the Ainur and the Valar and exactly what kinds of powers or authorities they are. He goes on in this same letter to explain the deep mystery that he's been working with in terms of this myth of creation, and that it has to do very specifically with this definition of evil that I'm trying to get you to, right? And it has to do with the problem of free will. We will watch the way Tolkien tests this over and over and over and over again in the stories. I want you to have this in your mind now, as he's going to show you what evil is, and to do so he needed to show you what creation was, because evil only exists insofar as there are creatures working within a creation, which could be, off the top of my head now, thinking why Buddhism doesn't have a strong understanding of evil, because it really doesn't. It just has a sense of suffering and escape from suffering, whereas Christianity and Judaism, Islam, we all have this understanding there is such a thing as evil. Well, it has to be within this understanding that we are creatures made with the ability also to make, right? So that theory of subcreation, and that what deeply matters in what Tolkien is trying to achieve in his creation stories is showing you how evil comes out of that creativity, right? Okay, again, I'm trying to unpack this all, and you realize that he's talking about Morgoth here, and he's going to talk about what Morgoth's sin is. And it comes through this problem of creation. And he tries to explain to Peter Hastings that this is all bound up with his term subcreation. We talked about subcreation right at the beginning, right? That's what we're doing in the Forge of Tolkien. We're trying to subcreate within his world and understand why creativity and making, authorship, as Sayers is doing, all of that matters to our understanding of ourselves as Christians, but Christians understanding ourselves as made in the image and likeness of a maker. Okay. To conclude, having mentioned free will, like, 'cause you do, right? I might say that in my myth, I have used subcreation in a special way to make visible and physical the effects of sin or misused free will by men. Visible and physical. Now, when we think about the way he has Iluvatar show the vision to the Ainur and then make it physical, right? So visible and physical. It's there at the beginning in his creation story, that what we're going to do is understand how being, the world as it is exists, right? The Ainur Lindale is entirely a story about creation, but it's a story about understanding our reality, and that reality is also moral, right? To make visible and physical the effects of sin or misused by free will by men. Okay. Free will is derivative and is therefore only operative within provided circumstances. But in order that they may exist, it's necessary that the author should guarantee it, whether besides, namely when it is against his will, as we say, at any rate as it appears on the finite view. He does not stop or make unreal sinful acts and their consequences. So in this myth, it is not feigned that he gave special subcreative powers to certain of his highest creative beings. That is a guarantee that what they devised and made should be given the reality of creation. Of course, within limits, and of course subject to certain commands or prohibitions. But if they fell, as the Diobolus Morgoth did, it's Melkor, who becomes the Morgoth, the enemy, by his fall, and started making things for himself to be their lord, these would then be, even if Morgoth broke the supreme ban against making other rational creatures like elves or men. They would at least be real physical realities in the physical world, however evil they might prove, even mocking the children of God. They would be Morgoth's greatest sins, abuses of his highest privilege, and would be creatures begotten of sin and naturally bad. I nearly wrote irredeemably bad, but that would be going too far, because by accepting or tolerating their making necessary to their actual existence, even orcs would become part of the world, which is God's and ultimately good. Okay, suddenly now we're on orcs. All right. Unfold back that. So he said, all of this is to show, this is what he's explaining to Peter Hastings, his Catholic friend. Everything that I've done is to show you about sin. And everything that I have written in my mythology is to make you understand that sin happens within this problem of creation. And that sin is it's interesting. It's in fact a guarantee that the things we make are real, right? And that we make them in time, and that God doesn't undo them, and therefore we are given. It's like the Iluvatar, through his thinking, the offspring of his thought, the Ainur sing. He gives the music. He shows them their music. He shows them the vision of what they have sung, and then he creates what they have sung. And at every step, and that's what so I've been stepping through with this problem. What Melkor gets up to, at every step, the things that Melkor does still fit within the theme, the reality, the physical world that Iluvatar creates. So you realize this is very deeply folded into the degree of both our freedom, like, I mean, consider Melkor is always to a certain extent reflecting our own abilities, right? And we'll get to elves and men and our own freedom, but these angelic beings, just like Augustine said, angels and men belong in the same problem, right? There's the city of God and the city of anti-God, or the anti-city of God. And just as Augustine said, we don't get two different stories here with the angels in one story and the men in another story. We're the same story, right? So if you understand what happens with the angels, it's also part of the story what happens to men, and vice versa. That, as Tolkien says, he gave them special subcreative powers to a certain of his highest creative beings. That is a guarantee that what they devised and made should be given the reality of creation. So, I mean, this is an incredibly powerful problem. Hint, hint, keep this in mind. This is the whole point of everything. To what degree do we, as artists, in our subcreative activities, made in the image and likeness in which we have been made, authors, mind of the maker, to what degree do we as subcreators fall into sin? What does it mean? How is it to, back when I was talking about the poem and whether you can make a bad poem and exactly what bad poetry would mean, Sayers doesn't take that up, at least there. We're going to get to like heresies and such, and that will be another kind of problem. This is simply the problem of actual existence having the possibility of evil. And you realize that the reason there is evil in creation is because the creation is so incredibly good. The creation is so good that God gives us actual participation in that creation, just as he gave the Ainur the ability to sing the music. I think that's all the pieces. So the problem with it's like, did Iluvatar mean Melkor to fall? Because he keeps pushing, he keeps putting all of the things that the discord and the disruption into the music and making it better. It's like this is also that big question of how can God make good come out of our sins? Well, he can, right? Your sins are always, God can always turn our own fall into something that's also part of his plan, right? So the omniscience, it always happens. It always fits with what God means. But one of the things God means is for us to be actually makers made in his likeness and image, and that is where the problem of evil comes from. I mean, quite plainly in the way Augustine set it up, because we make things against God's will, but God's will is for us to make things. That's why it's you realize it's like every time we say, is this evil what Melkor did? Is this evil? Is this evil? And it's every single thing, even the orcs, right? And you saw that when Tolkien pulls back and he's saying, Morgoth tries to make of his own abilities, he tries to be godlike, and I realize we haven't gotten there yet in the story. Okay, fine. Everything is always folding in back on itself. That he abuses his highest privilege and makes out of his own pride the orcs, but even that's going to be worked into the story, right? I nearly wrote irredeemably bad of the orcs, but that would be going too far, because by accepting or tolerating their making, necessary to their actual existence, even orcs would become part of the world, which is God's and ultimately good. Even the orcs exist, and that makes them part of the goodness. So does evil exist? Yes, in our sin, in our misuse of free will. But even that's part of God's plan. To be continued.